Welcome back to the show. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer and you are with Talk TV. Now, the BBC is facing a entirely predictable backlash after claiming that Dickensian poverty has striking parallels with today's society. Of course they do. Joining me right now to discuss this is historian and senior fellow at the New Culture Forum. That's Rafe Heydel-Mankoo. Good morning to you, Rafe.
Always a pleasure to be with you, Julia.
Oh, thank you very much for joining us. Very much appreciate this. This is a Radio 4 publicity announcement for new adaptations of Dickens' novels Hard Times, Little Dorrit and Our Mutual Friend. And in this publicity, it's written, in the autumn, there will be a new triple bill with titles in which the well-loved writer's critique of Victorian society has particularly striking parallels with life in Britain today. I mean, genuinely comparing people being in workhouses, children begging on the streets, Dickensian, we know what we mean by Dickensian level of poverty, and claiming that that is basically has parallels with how we live life today. Are these people certifiably insane?
Well, you might think that, but I think we're at the stage really where we need to think about renaming the BBC the ABBC, the Anti-British Broadcasting Corporation. Because you're quite right, you know, either they're mad or they've been completely captured by this sort of pernicious anti-British, anti-Western ideology that tries to, you know, they're supposed to be celebrating and promoting Britain, and instead of that, they constantly seem to want to denigrate and undermine the nation. Remember, it was just last year that the BBC pulled a similar stunt when it tried to shoehorn anti-colonialism into its adaptation of Great Expectations, a novel that's got nothing to do with colonialism at all. Yeah. And you're quite right, comparing poverty in 21st century Britain to the 19th century is sort of like comparing a scraped knee to having gangrene. I mean,
that is exactly, that is the level of, you know, unnecessary, you know, the idea that there's a parallel here, the comparison. But it's like, it's almost like they feel compelled to do it. The people who work in the BBC, whether it's on air or the people, the production teams or the people who, you know, direct all these documentaries and things like that, and indeed even the fictionalized dramas, they can't stop themselves. It's like they've got hiccups and they just can't, doesn't matter how much water they drink, they can't get rid of it. Their need to criticise this country, and who are we kidding? We know what they're trying to do. They're criticising the Tory government, aren't they? Which we could do quite happily for things they've actually done. But the idea we have Dickensian poverty is a blatant lie. I mean, maybe we should refer this to their Verify department at the BBC to verify whether this is true or not.
Yeah, I mean, look, there was, as you say, there was no National Health Service back in those days. Yep. No universal education, no system of welfare. I mean, you know, life expectancy was 40 years of age. Cities then were sort of hellish and disease-ridden. We've got no equivalent of the Victorian slums, you know, which would make the worst block of flats today look like a palace. You know, these were places with no indoor plumbing, people drinking dirty water from streams that had sewage in them and rubbish. Cholera and tuberculosis were rife everywhere. 10 people in a family living in one room. You had the workhouses, I mean, terrible places. Debtors' prisons, where you would see normal law-abiding people being sent to prison for being unable to pay their creditors. Brutal orphanages as well. And the working conditions in the workhouses, child labour, 15-hour days, malnutrition. I mean, one of the big differences, of course, is the working classes in the Victorian era were extremely thin and malnourished, whereas today, of course, obesity is the biggest issue amongst
very fair point. Do you think the person who wrote this and approved it, this wouldn't have gone just through one person? We know they'd have done everything by committee at the BBC because we're paying their wages. Are they just stupid and ignorant, never actually, didn't actually bother studying history even to, I mean, I wasn't even going to say GCSE level. I mean, to primary school level, you'd know a load of this stuff. Do you think that they, you know, they actually think they can get away with this stuff? And it's just is it just a sort of a virtue signal to their other friends at work and the rest of that world, the media world, that, oh, look, I've got to dig into to modern day Britain?
Yeah, I think there's a combination of things going on here. I think there's historical ignorance, but it's also combined with this pernicious ideology of progressive ideology, and also with a nihilistic culture of self-loathing. that has pervaded all of our institutions, not just the BBC. We see it with the National Trust, with the British Library. It's a fact of life now that our institutions constantly seek to undermine, and they don't compare us with other places because, you know, this all plays into the BBC's love of Plague Island. Brexit Britain is uniquely miserable, one of the worst places in the world, whereas we know, there are 3.5 million people in France going to food banks. Germany's had an explosion of food banks in recent years. The West as a whole isn't going through a golden era. I mean, we all can look wistfully back to life pre-2008, but there's always the BBC and the Guardian who constantly want to drag Britain down exclusively.
Yeah, it is absolutely bizarre, isn't it? It's the very strangest thing. Rafe at Heydel-Mankoo, thank you so much for joining us. Final quick word on that with Sam Armstrong.
Yeah, nothing new there. George Orwell said it was a peculiar feature of the British intelligentsia and elite that they loved doing nothing more than tearing down their own country. Nowhere else on earth does that happen.
And again, even like economically, anything that happens badly is due to Brexit or something, or the Tories, even if the same thing is happening worse in another country that is still part of the EU and has a left-wing government.
It's all your fault, Julia.
Yeah, OK, fair enough. I'll take the blame.